The opening 2 weekends of the 2025 men's NCAA tournament now in the books. We have a full week off until Saturday in San Antonio. We shall never forget. We will always remember. To the Alamo Dome we go for a Final Four in 2025. And Joe, just for the second time ever in the history of the Big Dance, all 4 teams on the one line, all 4 1 seeds continue playing into a Final Four, joining 2008 as the only other year. That Final Four also contested in San Antonio. Duke, Houston, second game of the night. Florida, Auburn, first game of the evening on a Saturday in San Antonio, in all SEC affair. Before we dive into the early looks, Joe, at these Final Four contests, let's take one big picture look at the 4 teams still in the hunt for a Final Four. Duke remains the national championship favorites at plus 105. Florida, second best price, plus 270. Houston, third best number at 4-1. And despite being the number 1 overall seed, Auburn actually the longest of the 4 teams in the Final Four to win a national crown at a 5-1 number. Joe, in your mind at this stage, is there value on a national championship number, or should we just focus on the specific Final Four games that we have?
Well, it's interesting, Ben, because if you are somebody that might be holding future tickets on, let's say, Florida or Houston, well, then you've got some decisions to make, because I believe Auburn is a dog, but not a 5-1 dog, right? So if there's a hedge to be had here and you don't have Duke in your pocket, I don't see a scenario where you're going to get Duke at a better price than this right now here, Ben. Do you?
I do not, Joe. And this is the final day of March.
Yep.
1 week exactly from tonight, Monday, April 7th, the national championship game in San Antonio. And those hypothetical odds are out right now. Things can change. Performances can be dominant. There could be an injury, knock on wood, and God forbid, in the Final Four. But if Houston were to pull the upset against Duke, the Cougs right now are projected as a slight underdog against either of the 2 teams from the SEC, Auburn and Florida. Duke, meanwhile, at least a 4.5-point favorite against the Gators, projected as a hypothetical 5.5-point favorite against the Auburn Tigers. Duke is that national championship favorite for a reason, but there is some value to be had. So how will we get to Monday night inside the Alamo Dome? Our first game, 6:09 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. The all-SEC clash between Florida and Auburn. And despite being that top overall team in the bracket, the Auburn Tigers are a 2.5-point underdog. It would be game number 4 only for the Tigers as a dog this year. Early in the year, on the road against Houston, they won outright. Again, in non-conference play, 3.5-point dog on the road in Durham against Duke. Most recently, Auburn on the road as a slight underdog against their rivals in Tuscaloosa. The Tigers won that game outright in a matchup of 1 versus 2 in the AP Top 25 at the time. Joe, does it feel fitting to see Auburn, the number 1 overall seed, even as a slight underdog against the Florida Gators?
Yeah, well, listen, 2 teams very familiar with one another, right? We caught this last round with Kentucky and Tennessee, although they had already played each other twice this year.
Yeah.
For Florida to have that confidence, to know that they went into Auburn's building and beat them convincingly, by the way. You know, these 2 teams kind of line up pretty much the same here. And while Auburn was able to, you know, top 10 in adjusted offense and defensive efficiency, well, guess what? Florida was like, yeah, we can match you body for body, length for length, shot for shot. I think it's going to be interesting who has the lead at the break in this game, Ben. I think it's going to have a lot to do with who might actually win this game when it's all said and done.
I would say the opening 20 minutes for Auburn yesterday against Michigan State, their best first half so far in the Big Dance. They covered as a 3.5-point favorite in the opening half against MSU, up by 9. As Joe shared, Just one meeting between these two teams, despite being conference foes this year. Maybe the best win in college basketball. Florida on the road as a 10.5-point dog, knocking off the Tigers on the Plains. We'll talk more about that game. Our nightcap on Saturday in the Final Four in the MOP odds, when hour number 2 on TEL comes your way now. We welcome you to hour number 2, live right here on this Monday morning on the early line on Sports Grid to set the stage for Final Four week in men's college basketball, with 2 more spots in the women's Final Four to be determined on this Monday evening as well. A little bit later on in this hour, our coach, J.Y. James Young, will be with us to break down what we saw this weekend during the Elite Eight. And, of course, to take an early look at the Final Four. We'll continue to look at the early lines here on the early line for our Final Four matchups on Saturday evening in San Antonio. A lot to get to here, Joe, in this second hour, including the opening weekend of the Major League Baseball season as well.
What an absolute crazy weekend it was, Ben. And let's be realistic, it's going to get even crazier over the next couple of weeks as well.
It's what we love right now in college hoops. Of course, the NBA season coming to a close, the regular season in the next 2 weeks, Major League Baseball beginning, all really good stuff. The NFL draft on the horizon at the end of this month, or starting tomorrow, the end of this month, because tomorrow is April 1st. Joe, we talked about Florida and Auburn, our first Final Four matchup on Saturday night. Again, the second meeting, that's it, between these SEC foes on Saturday in San Antonio. Florida winning the opening matchup of the year on the road as a double-digit dog against the Tigers. Auburn has not been an underdog since the middle of their conference slate on the road in Tuscaloosa against Alabama. Just game number 4 for Auburn as a dog this year. Let's quickly look at the nightcap on Saturday. Duke and Houston. The Blue Devils, a 4.5-point favorite in a total that stands at 136.5. Duke is the national championship favorite, where they were to start this season, where they were to begin the big dance, and now where they will be entering the Final Four. But, Joe, just how competitive do you think this game is going to be between the Blue Devils and the Cougs?
I think it's going to be extremely competitive. And we had mentioned earlier that a lot of the players on Houston were on the team a year ago that lost in the Sweet 16 to Duke. And they were very banged up at that time, Houston. They didn't have Jamal Sheed, who was, of course, their leader and their best player. He didn't play, and yet they still almost upended Duke in that game, 54-41. Now, Duke is a different team as well here, so right. But there is a revenge factor on this Houston side with guys that were there a year ago that is not on with the Duke side. So I think Duke, if they're going to lose, this is probably the game that you've got the best shot of them being knocked out.
A very different Duke team, of course, led by the outstanding freshman class, Cooper Flagg, Con Knipple, Kamon Maliwatch in that starting lineup. But do not forget Patrick Gungba or Isaiah Evans off the bench. A couple of different transfers this year for the Blue Devils as well. First Final Four berth, and then now the 3-year tenure, the 3-year era of John Shire in Durham. Jamal Shead gone for Houston, but a lot of those guys are back. Juwan Roberts, Emmanuel Sharp, LJ Cryer. It was a Sweet 16 matchup last year. Low-scoring affair. We only barely got to the century mark between the two. Duke winning as a slight underdog, catching about 3.5 points, 54-51. Duke now the favorite, laying 4.5 points against Houston. A lot of money on the Blue Devils early. About 84% of the spread bets on FanDuel early on Duke. Quickly moved this number to 5.5. A little bit of buyback in the market on Houston. That number now at 4.5 points in favor of the Cougs. So we showed you the national championship odds. Let's take it the individual approach here, Joe, to start off this second hour. Most outstanding player odds for the Final Four. And that is a big distinction, as we have tried to remind everybody throughout the big dance. It doesn't really matter what you have done to get to this point individually based on those performances, outside of the fact that your team is still here in the Final Four. Most outstanding player determined by this weekend, Saturday and Monday in San Antonio. No surprise, Joe, to see Cooper Flagg as the favorite, plus 120.
The two guys there should be, right? Cooper Flagg and Walter Clayton Jr., if those two teams end up advancing and meeting for the championship. I think Broom's injury is interesting now. What if they don't advance? They lose to Florida. But I'm looking at Knipple here, and while Cooper Flagg is the easiest one, the value is on the other side with his teammate there, who, by the way, carried them offensively in that last game. It was not Cooper Flagg, who did not have a great game shooting the ball. It was Knipple who actually carried the offense there. So I find that number interesting, Ben, at plus 3,000.
21 points for Con Knipple, Saturday night's leading scorer in that East Regional Final in Newark. Also had 20 against Arizona. I still think, Joe, based on a narrative, if you were to give an MVP of the East region over the weekend, it probably would have been Cooper Flagg, just based on narrative. I'm not so sure there is value in those favorites. I'd just rather bet Duke at plus 105 if I have not made the wager already to win a national championship. I'd rather bet Florida at plus 270 than Walter Clayton Jr. at plus 380. Sure, $1.10 could be more in my pocket based on that number, but then you are also allowing the opportunity for a guy like Thomas Houck or Will Richard or Elijah Martin to have a huge weekend in the Final Four to lead Florida to a national championship. It is those secondary players that if you want a small sprinkle, that's where you find some value. I would say Janai Broom's price is interesting. 5-1 number on Auburn to win a national championship. Longest of our four teams that have reached San Antonio, $3.50 back. For Auburn's best player, by a good margin, that is Janai Broom. Could be worth a sprinkle just based on value compared to that national championship price.
Well, yeah, you have to consider it, right? Because if you're talking about narrative, Ben, as much narrative and hype that Cooper Flagg has, and by the way, all warranted, the hype around Broom right now and what he did coming in, pulling the old, Willis Reed act there yesterday, coming back in against Michigan State, one arm. He's chucking up, making threes. He's still rebound. The narrative is all of a sudden switched here a little bit. So he is maybe the wild card of all the names on that list right now.
And you see how Houston goes about it. Strength in numbers for Kelvin Sampson and the Cougs. L.J. Cryer 10-1, Milos Uzan 16-1, Emmanuel Sharp 23-1, Jawan Roberts 27-1. Houston, the most players in the 10 best prices to win the MLP. That's kind of how they do it based on depth and balance. Good luck finding the needle in the haystack, if you will. Might as well just bet the Cougars at a plus 470 price, whatever that number is. 4-1 price, to win a national championship. Outside of our teams in the Final Four, Joe, a storyline sadly entering the second weekend for a Maryland Terrapins team that had reached the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2016 was the focus on their egotistical individual head coach. That is Kevin Willard, making the story about his job status, throwing the entirety of the Maryland athletics department under the bus, only to take a new job at Villanova. What we knew was going to happen at some point after the Terps were bounced from the big dance was officially announced in the early morning hours on Sunday. Kevin Willard, the new head coach, on the main line at Villanova.
Yeah, listen, in these type of situation, Ben, we all understand there's enough blame to go around. And while, yes, he went ahead and made it very public, it's all about leverage in these spots, right, Ben? So ultimately, he would have only put himself in a spot to make more money. I don't blame a guy for doing that. I do think, though, they did drag their feet in Maryland and allowed it to get to this point, which is unfortunate for everyone involved.
He kind of held them up hostage slightly. Maryland did answer his demands. Listen, a lot to be done for a guy that has been a head coach at the D1 level for 18 years and has one Sweet 16 berth to show for it based on an outstanding lottery pick freshman and Derek Queen. That's all I'll say. Our coach, James Young, joins us next. Sure, it's about 5 days away. A Saturday night in San Antonio for a Final Four. But with how good this Final Four is set to be, for just the second time ever in the history of the men's NCAA tournament, we have all 4 1 seeds that have advanced to a Final Four. We got to take an early look because we can mark it right now where the market is and then see where it changes in the coming day. So we will break down both of our matchups on Saturday with that early line approach in our early leans here on the early line. All SEC affair, Joe, in our first game of 2, Saturday night inside the Alamo Dome in San Antonio. Florida and Auburn. The Gators a slight favorite despite not being the number 1 overall seed. 2.5-point spread in a total at 160 and a hook. We talked about the spread earlier. You believe, as do I, that Florida is very justified as that slight favorite against Auburn. Let's talk that point total here to begin. 160 and a hook. Both teams as efficient as you would like on the offensive end of the floor, but neither team a slouch defensively. How many points do you think we see on Saturday in San Antonio to start?
Well, I can tell you this, the market has been doing nothing but hammering the under in this one. 162.5 is an open, Ben, and we're seeing nothing but under money come in down to 160.5 here. And listen, big stage, Final Four, I get it. These two teams, Ben, in many aspects are like looking in a mirror at one another. They both excel at a lot of the same things. They both have some depth. They've got shooters. I think Florida does have an edge as far as some of the big men that they can throw out there. And they also have the knowledge and the experience of having dropped 90 on this Auburn team in that first game in their own building and getting it done. So I think that game alone, although I'm not going to put a whole lot of stock into what we had in that game. Again, it might as well have been years ago, but they did not have one of their 7-footers, Florida. Broome was actually pretty good in that game, but different teams at this particular point now. I do think they deserve, though, because of that win, a look as a slight favorite. But I'd be shocked if this total drops into the 150s at any point here, Ben. I think the initial move to the under is expected. I wouldn't, if you're looking to bet the under, don't bet it now. I would wait because we all know the over money is coming, Ben, before tip.
And Florida has gone over in every single game so far, all 4 of their wins in the Big Dance. They have gone over in 11 straight games as well. Joe, that win for Florida on the road, on the Plains against the Tigers back on February 8th, the second full Saturday in the month of February, was a defining victory for the Gators this year. It kind of legitimized what they were doing, overly impressive, but Florida did not play the non-conference slate that a couple of their conference compatriots, Auburn or Alabama, did. So to win that game as a double-digit dog, which looking back, now seeing Florida getting 10.5, 11 points from anybody is ridiculous, even on the road against the Tigers. But I think that was a statement for Florida to put up 90 against Auburn on the road and win outright. It was also their second win in those 12 victories in their final 13 games, including the SEC tournament before the Big Dance. And in all 12 of those wins, Florida covered. Florida has not covered except for one game, second half, and the Sweet 16 against Maryland on Thursday night. I do find this line incredibly interesting. And in terms of the money already, Joe, in terms of the spread, 75% of the money in the spread betting on the FanDuel Sportsbook back in the Gators early on.
Yeah, and it doesn't shock me. And I don't know that we're going to get a ton. I don't know we're going to get a ton more movement, Ben, if we're being completely honest here. I think that we're going to see a pretty healthy dose of folks wanting just to take the points regardless because they see the teams even. I think you're going to see also a lot of hedging this week, Ben, with people who are holding tickets for Florida to win a national championship, that this is their opportunity to back Auburn. I think that's going to affect some of these numbers and the ticket handle as well at FanDuel. because when else are you going to do it? Now's the time to hedge out at plus money with Auburn. Well, now is the time to hedge it out if you're holding a Florida ticket.
Auburn, the number 1 overall seed in the Big Dance. And I would say, Joe, that for all 40 minutes, looked a part of that number 1 overall seed, really for the first time in this tournament yesterday against Michigan State. Sure, they only win by 6 at the end, a flurry of scoring from the Spartans. Auburn was up double digits for a good majority of the final half of the opening half and that second half against MSU for a team that dropped 3 of their final 4 games entering the Big Dance, playing a lot better. Under in 5 of their last 6, under in 3 of 4 for Auburn here in the NCAA tournament. The Tigers, by the way, only a dog 3 times this year. Twice in the non-conference, a semi-away game against Houston. It was not played inside the Fertitta Center, but in the Toyota Center, the home of the Rockets in H-Town early in the year. Game number 2 for Auburn. If you remember, the story for that game was an Auburn team plane that had to turn around because of a fight on board. For where that Tigers team began the year to where they are now, pretty incredible stuff. They won outright as a 5.5-point dog against Houston. They were a 3.5-point dog against Duke on the road in Durham. Lost that game by 6. The last time Auburn was an underdog on the road in Tuscaloosa, middle of February, a matchup of 1 versus 2 in the AP poll. The Tigers won that game outright. Joe, I think you have 2 very dangerous teams facing each other in what should be an instant classic, at least we hope, in the Final Four to start on Saturday night. And that will be a theme because of how good these teams are. We should be in for some marquee matchups in San Antonio, at least we hope.
And, the cream will rise to the top, and it always will here in this spot. I do think, and I think maybe an interesting question, Ben, who has the coaching edge in that game?
Ooh, a really good question. You think Bruce Pearl has more of the experience, but what Todd Golden has done, pretty impressive. By the way, Golden was hired on Bruce Pearl's staff earlier during their time together at Auburn. More on the early line next. The first game of the Final Four on Saturday, an all-SEC affair between Florida and Auburn. 2.5-point spread in favor of the Gators, a total that stands at 160.5. Our nightcap, oh man, on paper, this is one of the best basketball games you could ever dream of. It is Duke and Houston. The Blue Devils, a 4.5-point favorite. The over-under stands at 136.5. I think the 4.5-point number, Joe, speaks to the strength of this Duke team. But I also think it does not allow you to overlook Houston by any means. How competitive is this game going to be between the Cougs and the Blue Devils?
Impossible to choose here, Ben. It really is. I mean, this is another one of these where if styles make fights, right? Well, you're looking at 2 teams that are pretty much identical lockdown defensively. They also are capable of pulling it up, playing from 3. Duke isn't exactly. We know Houston plays with 0 pace. It's like watching paint dry, but. Yeah, Duke is not that far behind. Their choice is not to run up and down and get into some sort of crazy firefight here. So, I mean, both of these teams are so similar in so many ways. It feels like, Ben, the only value here is by taking points. And if you're going to get the market who's going to overvalue Duke, although it's warranted, is this more than a final possession game? There's no way I'm looking at an over. I'll tell you that. 15-9 to the under is what Sampson is with Houston in the tournament. I don't see this thing getting to 140 points. That's for sure as well.
And Joe, these 2 teams met last year in the Sweet 16. Very different cast and crew for Duke. A lot of the same pieces for Houston, especially because Jamal Shedd did not play in that game for the Cougars. They're emotional and on-the-floor leader last year as well. That game was 54-51. Houston was a slight favorite. Duke won outright as an underdog. Of course, whatever the pregame total was, I think in the low 130s, did stay under. So far in this NCAA tournament, Houston has played to the under in 3 of 4 games. They got off to a very slow start against Gonzaga. Then the Zags, in their comeback in the round of 32, kind of opened it up to go over a total of 141 and a half. Again, Houston, like Auburn, as you would expect as a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, has not been booked as an underdog often this year. Just once on the road in Allen Fieldhouse to end out January. That was a crazy game. Kansas was up by as many as 20, I believe, before Houston rallied to win outright as an underdog. One of the worst defeats the KU has taken inside the Fog in a very, very long time. Duke, though, in the NCAA tournament, has covered Joe in 3 of their 4 games. The only game they did not, that was against Arizona in the Sweet 16. They still won by 7 as about an 8.5, 9.5 point favorite. Duke has been a favorite in basically every game this year, especially since ACC play got started, laying at least 6 points. This will be the shortest number in favor of Duke since they began in the calendar year 2025.
There's no doubt this is the hardest one to pick here. And the fact that, I don't want to say overvalued, Ben, but we know the public is going to love themselves some Duke here. And are they capable of winning this thing by a touchdown? Absolutely they are. But with the kind of pace I think that's going to be played, and shots are going to be at a premium, it doesn't feel like either of these two teams are going to be able to win by multiple possessions. It just feels like I'll take the points regardless, one way or the other, because I'd want to be having points given to me as opposed to having to lay them in this spot.
Yeah, and I think that's a really sound philosophy as well, Joe. One of the things that I think will be a key matchup indicator that I thought was really different for Duke this second weekend, playing against a team in Arizona that wants to play with pace, and of course Alabama, who wants to be as fast as you can. Entering the Sweet 16, Duke held their opponents to the slowest average possession length in the country, 364 of 364, at exactly 19.6 seconds on average. That is almost the entirety of the shot clock on average. What exactly is the average possession length for Houston on the offensive end of the floor? 19.6 seconds. That should work in Duke's favor to keep this game slow. 136.5, a very intriguing total for a nightcap on a Saturday in the Final Four. That does it for hour number 2 here on the early line. Our third and final hour comes your way up next, right here on Sports Grid. Welcome to hour number 3, live right here on the early line on Sports Grid. I am Ben Stevens. He is Joe Ranieri. One more hour to go up until 11 a.m. Eastern time. And in this third and final hour, we'll talk some NBA basketball after the weekend. Less than 2 weeks remain in the regular season. 2 weeks from yesterday, on a Sunday in the middle of April, that will do it for 82 games around the NBA. The playoff spots that need to be figured out, the postseason positioning that needs to take shape, and a couple of games around the association to break down here. We will also get the proper perspective on this Monday from TV Tom Vecchio with a 14-game slate in Major League Baseball that starts with some afternoon baseball on this Monday, a little bit after 2 p.m. Eastern time. All of that and plenty more here on this Monday in the final hour, Joe, of the early line.
Gotta love, right? You got baseball back in full effect here during the week. Couple of afternoon games here. By the way, we still have another college basketball tournament getting ready to start here, Ben, believe it or not. So still got a little something for everybody as we say goodbye to the month of March.
Yeah, we certainly do. There are 2 more spots at stake tonight in the women's Final Four to be figured out. A Lone Star State battle. Texas and TCU. The Longhorns, a 1 seed, a 7.5 point favorite against Haley Van Lith and the Horned Frogs. A 14.5 point number in favor of UConn, led by Paige Beckers, and a 40-point performance in the Sweet 16 win over Oklahoma. Of course, against USC without Juju Watkins. It is why that spread is so large. But now, Joe, as we look at the Final Four this weekend in San Antonio, we wanted to hear from the people. As we think about cutting down the nets, exactly 1 week from tonight in San Antonio, with only 4 teams still standing, but all 4 teams chalk on the one line for just the second ever time in the history of the men's big dance, which is the best bet to win a national championship at this moment? That's what we had to ask all of you in Fade the Public. Four teams left in the chase for a national championship. All four teams a 1 seed as we get ready for San Antonio and a Saturday night in the Final Four. Duke is the national championship favorite, where they were to start this season, where they were to start the NCAA tournament. Now at plus 105. Florida's second best number at plus 270. Houston a 4-1 number. Auburn, despite being the number 1 overall seed, the longest number at 5-1. So, Joe, of those numbers and of those teams, which is the best bet to win a title and cut down the nets exactly 1 week from tonight? At Sports Grid on Twitter, the public is backing the favorite. Really, how can you blame them at this moment in a tournament defined by its chalk, defined by its favorites having overwhelming success? 43% backing Duke at that plus 105 number.
Well, I mean, the public is right from this aspect here, Ben. Now is the time to bet Duke. If you haven't, this is the last time you're going to get them at plus money here. They're not going to be a dog in the next game, no matter who they play, whether it be Florida or Auburn. They will be the favorite there. So if you think Duke can beat Houston, well, then you got to believe that Duke can win it all, Ben. So I think the public, whether they realize it or not, this is your last chance to get on the Duke Blue Devils to win it all. And heck, if they beat Houston, Ben, I think a lot of people believe it's already over then at that point. This might be their toughest obstacle.
Again, Joe, the favorites in this tournament have been sensational. We talked about 6+ point favorites, 32-2 straight up. Of course, you want to cash tickets as you lay it with the spread. If you're back in the Blue Devils minus 4.5, you're hoping they beat Houston by at least 5 points. But Duke is a favorite of 4.5 points, so we expect them to get to the national championship game. And in that national championship game, against either of the two teams hailing from the SEC, Duke would be a 4.5 point favorite in the projected hypothetical lines against Florida, a 5.5 point favorite against Auburn. In a tournament defined not by its chaos this time around, but by its chalk, it makes a lot of sense. I would say from a best bet perspective, though, I would look to the other side. Because Duke is a favorite, I do think you can find some value on that Florida price at plus 270. Now, I have a number on the Gators at 11-1, bet back in early February because Florida lived up to the Ken Palm numbers that we know are the thresholds that you have to meet, and they were a top 12 team in the Week 6 AP poll. I will say, Joe, in the last 20 years, we have seen all 20 national champions be in the top 12 of the Week 6 AP poll. Houston stumbled a little bit early on during Feast Week. Houston was not in the top 12 of the Week 6 AP top 25. Just so you know that the other three teams were. I do think there is some value on Florida and or Auburn at that 5-1 price because, Joe, as you alluded to, 5-1 right now on the Tigers for the number 1 overall seed. They're not going to be a 5-1 money line underdog even if you were to bet both of those money line prices in these matchups against either Florida or Duke. So I do think there is some value on Auburn.
Listen, there is, and the interesting part at these prices here, thank goodness Duke is this chalky, Ben, because you can still come up with a scenario where I can bet Duke to win it all at plus 105, and I can still bet Houston in the points and have a shot at winning both bets, Ben. Because there's also, so you can do the same thing with Auburn, right? You can bet Auburn to win it all, but you can also bet Auburn, take the points, or at some point during the game, bet it, get a really good number, and you'll have both sides of a pretty good bet with a pretty good opportunity to win a national championship.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And, Joe, just to say, I did a little bit of math from the moneyline perspective. Auburn right now, a plus 125 moneyline underdog. Again, a projected 5.5 point favorite against Duke if they were to get there. Part of that, of course, is baked into the idea that what if Houston wins a game when they are only a 4.5 point underdog? But if Auburn were to win this game outright against Duke and then be a 5.5, 4.5 point underdog, the money line price of a two-leg money line parlay with the Tigers as a dog in both would be a little bit better than 5-1. That being said, both of the SEC teams would be a slight 1.5 favorite against Houston in a projected national championship matchup. Joe, just a quick aside here for a little bit of breaking news to start off this third and final hour. Of course, 2 weeks ago, Andrew Luck, the new acting GM for the Stanford football program, of course, at his alma mater, firing Troy Taylor, who had some complaints against him for harassment in the workplace. After only 2 years and leaving Sacramento State for the Cardinal, Andrew Luck making the decision as the GM to effectively dismiss head coach Troy Taylor. So in his place, as Stanford is undergoing a national search, how about this thing? Frank Reich will be the acting interim head coach for the Stanford Cardinal in the 2025 college football season. Frank Reich has never worked collegiately in any coaching capacity. He will now be the interim head coach for Stanford just for 2025. As the reports are stating, Joe, it is a one-year rental. Both sides understanding that this is only for 1 year, at least as of right now.
Yeah, and well, you know how it works, Ben, with the recruiting process and everything else. Not a good time to be in search of or have no leader of your football team, but stability, I think, is what Andrew Luck said he wanted the most, right? Wanted to stabilize this program, and what better than Frank Reich to be a stabilizer there in this situation where there are no winners at this point.
When Andrew Luck was at Stanford, they were an incredible team under Jim Harbaugh. I do not believe that they ever interacted, Andrew Luck and Frank Reich, in Indianapolis, because Frank, how? Where? Find it for me. All right, we'll talk about that on the other side of the break.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Sure. I don't think they did. All right, we'll talk about it up next.